There's a kind of silence that means peace. And there's a kind of silence that means something is wrong. Caleb Mercer knew the difference. He'd lived alone on his ranch at the edge of the Cimarron Valley for 11 years. He knew what the wind sounded like when a storm was rolling in. He knew the sound of coyotes circling too close at night. And he knew, deep in his bones, when the quiet got too quiet. The widow's cabin sat a half-mile east. Small, crooked chimney. A fence she'd built herself, leaning slightly to the left like it was tired of standing. Every morning, without fail, smoke curled up from that chimney before the sun even touched the ridge. Every evening, the faint glow of a lantern burned in her window until exactly 9 o'clock. She was a creature of habit, that woman. But 2 mornings ago, no smoke, no lantern that night. And now, standing on his porch with coffee going cold in his hand, Caleb stared at that cabin and felt something shift in his chest. Something heavy, something old. Before we begin this story, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Sending love your way wherever you are. Now stay with me on this one, because what Caleb found when he finally walked to that cabin changed everything he thought he knew about the woman who lived next door, and it almost got him killed. The widow arrived in the fall of 1883. No wagon train, no family, just a single mule pulling a cart loaded with everything she owned, which wasn't much. A trunk, a rocking chair with a broken arm, a cast-iron stove that took 3 men from town to unload, and a girl, a small girl, maybe 5 or 6, with dark hair and darker eyes, who sat on top of that trunk and didn't say a word the whole time. Caleb had been mending a fence along the eastern boundary of his property when he first saw them. The mule was struggling up the trail that led to the old Pearson homestead, a place that had been empty for 2 years since Hank Pearson drank himself to death and his kin sold the land to a buyer. None of them ever met. Apparently, that buyer was her. She didn't wave, didn't nod. She looked straight ahead, jaw set, hands gripping the reins like they owed her money. The girl glanced at Caleb once. Just once, with those wide, unreadable eyes, and then they were past him, and the dust settled, and it was like they'd never been there at all. That evening, Caleb rode into the town of Buckhorn, a sad little collection of buildings strung along a dry creek bed that called itself a town more out of stubbornness than accuracy. He tied his horse outside the general store and went in to buy salt and tobacco. "You see the new one?" asked Edgar Finch, the shopkeeper, before Caleb even got to the counter. Edgar was the kind of man who knew everything about everyone and couldn't keep his mouth shut about any of it. "Widow. Name's Clara Dunn. Came from somewhere back east, I hear. Missouri, maybe further." "Saw her," Caleb said. "Got a daughter. Quiet little thing. Didn't say a word when they came in for supplies. The woman neither, come to think of it. Just pointed at what she wanted, paid in cash, loaded up, and left." Edgar leaned forward. "Paid in gold coin, Caleb. Gold. You ever see a widow who pays in gold?" Caleb hadn't, but he also didn't care. People came to places like the Cimarron Valley for one reason, to be left alone. He understood that better than most. So he left her alone. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. He'd see her sometimes from a distance, hauling water from the creek, splitting wood, working on that crooked fence. She moved with a kind of fierce determination, like every task was a war she intended to win. She never asked for help. Not once. Not even when a late autumn storm tore half the shingles off her roof and she spent 3 days up on a ladder in the cold, nailing them back on while the girl watched from the doorway. Caleb almost went over that time. Almost. He got as far as saddling his horse before he stopped himself. "She doesn't want your help," he told himself. Respect that. He respected it. The town tried too in its way. Martha Greer, the preacher's wife, brought over a pie once. Clara accepted it politely, thanked her at the door, and never invited her inside. Martha came back to town saying the cabin was neat as a pin but cold as a grave, and that the woman had eyes that look right through you. The preacher himself, Reverend Greer, tried twice to invite her to Sunday services. Twice she declined. Not rudely, just firmly, like a door closing. The men in town took notice of her too, of course. She was not old, maybe 30, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with the sun and the hard living. She had sharp features, high cheekbones, and hair the color of rust that she kept pinned up tight. But there was something about her that kept them at bay. Not coldness exactly, more like a warning, like the way a rattlesnake coils before it strikes. You don't need to hear the rattle to know you should step back. Caleb went about his life. He worked his cattle. He rode his fences. He sat on his porch in the evenings and watched the sun drop behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and copper. And every night, he'd see the faint glow of her lantern across the half-mile of scrubland that separated their lives. It became a kind of comfort, that light, a small, steady proof that he wasn't the only soul out here holding on. He never told anyone that. He barely admitted it to himself. Their first real conversation didn't happen until 4 months after she arrived. And it happened because of the girl. It was February, and the creek had swollen with early snowmelt. Caleb was riding along the bank, checking for erosion near his south pasture, when he heard the scream. "Hi, Then." A child's scream, the kind that cuts through everything, that makes your blood go cold before your brain even catches up. He kicked his horse hard and came around the bend at a gallop. The girl was in the creek. Not the deep part, it was barely 3 feet, but the current was fast and she was small and she'd slipped on the rocks and gone under. She was clawing at the surface, gasping, getting pulled downstream toward a tangle of fallen branches. Caleb didn't think. He was off his horse and into the water in 3 strides, boots filling with ice, the cold hitting him like a fist. He caught the girl by the arm, then the waist, and hauled her up against his chest. She clung to him with a grip that surprised him, tiny fingers digging into his coat like she'd never let go. He carried her to the bank and set her down. She was shaking violently, lips blue, teeth chattering so hard he could hear them. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her. "You're all right," he said. "You're all right now." She looked up at him with those dark eyes. And then, for the first time, she spoke. "Mama's gonna be angry." Before Caleb could respond, he heard hoofbeats, hard and fast. He looked up and saw Clara coming down the ridge on her mule, riding it bareback with nothing but a rope halter, and she was moving faster than any mule had a right to. Her face was white. Her eyes were wild. She hit the ground before the mule even stopped, sliding in the mud, and then she was on her knees in front of the girl, hands on her face, checking, touching, pulling her close. "Sophie, Sophie, are you hurt? Are you hurt?" The girl, Sophie, shook her head against her mother's chest. Clara held her there for a long moment, rocking slightly, eyes closed. Then she looked up at Caleb, and what he saw in her face was something he recognized, something he carried in his own chest every day. Terror, not the kind that comes and goes, the kind that lives in you, the kind that never fully sleeps. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, but barely. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." She knew his name. He hadn't told her. He'd never spoken to her, but she knew it. "She's strong," Caleb said, nodding towards Sophie. "Held on until I got there." Clara looked at her daughter, and something complicated moved across her face. Pride and pain and something else, something guarded. "She shouldn't have been down here," Clara said, and there was an edge to it, not directed at him, but present nonetheless, like she was angry at the world for having creeks and currents and dangers she couldn't build a fence against. She stood up, lifting Sophie onto her hip as though the girl weighed nothing, and turned toward the mule. "Mrs. Dunn," Caleb said. She stopped but didn't turn around. "If you ever need anything, I won't." She said it without malice, without emotion at all, just a fact, delivered like the weather report. "It will rain. The sun will set. I won't need anything from you." She rode away with Sophie clinging to her neck, and Caleb stood there in the mud with ice water in his boots, watching them go. That night, the lantern in her window burned past midnight. After that, something shifted. Not much, not obviously, but Caleb would find things on his fence post some mornings. A jar of preserves, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, once a pair of wool socks, hand-knitted, left in a tin to keep them dry. She never said they were from her. He never asked. But who else could they be from? He reciprocated in his own way. He'd leave a bundle of cut firewood near her fence line, a sack of oats for the mule. Once, a small wooden horse he'd carved by lamplight. He left it on her porch railing without a note. The next time he saw Sophie from a distance, she was carrying it in her hand like a treasure. They didn't speak. Not really. A nod across the distance. A raised hand. Once, he swore he saw her almost smile. Just the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth, when she found a bundle of wildflowers he'd left with the firewood. He hadn't meant to leave flowers. They'd just been growing right there, and he'd grabbed them without thinking. It was, he supposed, a kind of friendship, built on silence and fence posts and the half-mile of scrubland between them. Spring came. The valley turned green. Sophie could sometimes be heard laughing. A sound so rare and bright it made Caleb's chest ache in a way he didn't understand. And then came the men. They rode into Buckhorn on a Tuesday afternoon. 3 men on horses too good for this part of the country, wearing coats too clean, carrying guns too polished. The kind of men who didn't belong here and knew it and didn't care. Caleb wasn't in town that day. He heard about it later from Edgar Finch, who told him with the nervous energy of a man who'd seen something that scared him but couldn't stop talking about it. The tall one did all the talking, Edgar said, leaning across the counter like he was sharing a state secret. Asked about the Pearson place. Asked who lived there now. I told him I didn't know much, and he looked at me like I was lying, which I was, and then he smiled. Caleb, I'm telling you. That smile didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. What did he look like? Tall, thin, mustache like a razor line, gray coat, black hat. Had a scar right here. Edgar drew a line across his own cheekbone, like someone had tried to take his face off and almost succeeded. The other 2? Rougher, bigger. The kind of men who don't talk because they don't need to. They just stand behind the one who does and let you imagine what happens if you say the wrong thing. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. They still in town? Left this morning. Headed east. Edgar paused. Toward the valley, Caleb. Toward your way. Caleb rode home fast that afternoon. He checked his property, his livestock, his fences. Everything was fine. Normal. But when he looked toward Clara's cabin, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Her windows were shuttered, in the middle of the day, and the rocking chair that usually sat on her porch was gone. Pulled inside. She was hiding. He almost went over. Almost. But he thought about that voice, I won't. And he stayed on his own land and watched the horizon until the sun went down. The next morning, the shutters were open again. Smoke rose from the chimney. Sophie was outside, playing with the wooden horse near the fence. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe it was nothing. But that night, he loaded his rifle and set it by the door, just in case. A week passed. Then 2. The strangers didn't appear, and Caleb began to relax. Spring deepened. The grass grew tall. He had calves to brand and fences to repair, and the rhythm of ranch work pushed the unease to the back of his mind. Then, on a Wednesday morning in late April, he woke before dawn and walked to his porch with his coffee, and he looked east toward Clara's cabin. No smoke. He waited. The sun crept over the ridge, painting the valley gold. He watched the chimney. Nothing. No movement outside. No Sophie running along the fence line. He told himself it was early. People sleep in sometimes. Even creatures of habit break their patterns now and then. By noon, there was still nothing. No smoke. No movement. The mule was in its pen. He could see it pacing, agitated, like it hadn't been fed. By evening, no lantern burned in the window. Caleb sat on his porch in the dark, staring at the black shape of the cabin against the stars, and he felt that heaviness in his chest again. That old, familiar weight. Something was wrong. He waited through the next day, Thursday, telling himself she might have gone to town, might have taken Sophie to see someone, might have a perfectly good explanation. But the mule was still there, still unfed, and now it was braying. A sound that carried across the scrubland like a distress call. Nobody leaves their animal like that. Not out here. Not Clara. By Thursday night, with no smoke, no lantern, no sign of life for 2 full days, Caleb made a decision. At first light, he was going to that cabin. And God help whoever was responsible if something had happened to her. Friday morning broke cold. An unseasonable chill had crept into the valley overnight, and frost clung to the grass like tiny shards of glass. Caleb's breath came in white clouds as he saddled his horse in the gray light before dawn. He rode the half-mile slowly, not because he wasn't urgent, but because something in him wanted to be careful, wanted to see everything, track everything. If there was danger ahead, he intended to meet it with his eyes open. He noticed the tracks first. 3 sets of hoofprints, coming from the east, cutting across the trail that led to Clara's property. The prints were deep, heavy horses moving fast. They were maybe 2 days old, judging by the edges, softened by wind but not yet filled. 3 horses, 3 men. His jaw tightened. He approached the cabin from the north side, keeping to the tree line, rifle across his saddle. The place looked abandoned. The front door was closed but not latched. It swung slightly in the morning breeze, bumping against the frame with a sound that set his teeth on edge. The mule saw him first and brayed loudly, pressing against the fence of its pen. Its water trough was dry. Its feed bin was empty. Caleb dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. He pulled the rifle from its scabbard, chambered around, and walked to the front door. He pushed it open. The inside of the cabin told a story, and it wasn't a good one. The table was overturned. A chair lay on its side, one leg snapped off. Broken glass on the floor. A kerosene lamp, shattered. The cast-iron stove was cold, its door hanging open. Pots and supplies were scattered like someone had torn through the place in a hurry, or in a fight. Clara's rocking chair, the one with the broken arm, lay on its back near the fireplace. And there, on the floor beside it, was a dark stain. Brown, dried, blood. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make Caleb's hands tighten on his rifle until his knuckles went white. He moved through the cabin carefully, reading the scene like a tracker reads a trail. 2 rooms. The main room where the stove and table were, and a smaller room in the back, a bedroom. Inside, he found a small bed with a quilt pulled half off. Sophie's bed. A rag doll lay on the pillow. They'd been taken from their home. Both of them, Clara and Sophie, taken or driven out. He went back outside and circled the cabin, reading the ground. The hoofprints told the rest of the story. 3 horses had come in from the east trail. They'd stopped at the cabin. And then he followed the tracks carefully. They'd left heading south, toward the canyon country, toward the Badlands. But there were no additional horse tracks leaving. Clara didn't have a horse, just the mule, and the mule was still here, which meant they'd been carried. On the men's horses, against their will, Caleb stood in the yard, breathing hard, his mind racing. He could ride to Buckhorn, get the sheriff, old Tom Hadley, a decent man but slow, cautious, the kind who liked to assess the situation while the situation got worse. By the time Tom assembled a posse, if he even would, another day would be lost. Maybe 2. And in the canyon country, 2 days could mean anything. 2 days could mean a shallow grave. No, he wouldn't wait for Tom Hadley. He went back inside the cabin and looked more carefully. Under the overturned table, he found something. A folded piece of paper, half hidden, like it had been dropped or left in a hurry. He picked it up and opened it. It was a deed, a land deed, for a mining claim in Missouri. The name on it read, Thomas J. Dunn, Clara's husband, the dead husband, and beneath the official stamp and the legal language, someone had written in pencil, in a rough, slanted hand, "She knows where it is. Make her talk." Caleb folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He watered the mule, filled its feed bin with hay from the small barn, and then mounted his horse. He checked his rifle. He checked his sidearm, a Colt .45 he hadn't fired in 2 years. He filled his canteen. He packed jerky and hardtack into his saddlebag. Then he turned south and followed the tracks into the canyon country. The trail led through scrubland and down into the dry washes that cut through the red rock like veins in a body. The hoofprints were clear here. The soil was soft, sandy, sheltered from wind. 3 horses moving at a steady pace. Not running, confident. These men weren't worried about being followed. They should have been. Caleb rode through the morning and into the afternoon. The canyons deepened around him, walls of red and orange stone rising on either side, narrowing the sky to a strip of blue above. The air was dry and still. The only sounds were his horse's hooves on stone and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. By late afternoon, he smelled smoke. Not wildfire smoke, campfire smoke. Faint, but present, carried on a shift in the wind. He was close. He dismounted and led his horse off the main trail, tying it in a shallow alcove behind a stand of juniper. Then he took his rifle and moved forward on foot, keeping low, keeping to the shadows of the canyon walls. And as the sun began its descent, painting the rock faces in shades of fire, Caleb Mercer crept toward the smoke, and whatever waited in the dark beyond it. The camp was set in a natural bowl at the base of a cliff, a sheltered spot, hidden from above, accessible only through a narrow gap in the rock that served as a natural gate. Clever. These men knew what they were doing. Caleb lay on his belly on a ledge about 40 feet above the camp, looking down through a gap in the rock. The evening light was fading fast, but he could see enough. 3 horses, picketed near a steep spring at the base of the cliff. A small fire burning low, 2 bedrolls laid out on the ground. And near the far wall of the bowl, under an overhang of rock, 2 figures sat on the ground. Clara and Sophie. Clara sat with her back against the rock wall, Sophie in her lap, her arms wrapped around the girl like armor. Even from this distance, Caleb could see the tension in her body. Every muscle coiled, every line rigid. Her face was shadowed, but he could see a dark mark on her cheek. A bruise, or worse. Sophie was still, too still for a child. She was pressed against her mother's chest, face hidden, small body curled tight. Of the 3 men, Caleb could see 2. One sat by the fire, poking at it with a stick, his hat pulled low. The bigger one of the rough ones Edgar had described, was leaning against a boulder near the horses, eating something from a tin. His rifle lay across his knees. The 3rd man, the tall one, the one with the scar, was nowhere in sight. That worried Caleb more than anything. An enemy you can't see is an enemy you can't plan for. He studied the layout. The gap in the rock was the only ground-level way in or out. The walls of the bowl were steep but not vertical, climbable if you were careful but not quickly. If shooting started, Clara and Sophie were pinned against the back wall with no cover except the overhang. He needed to be precise. He needed to be fast. And he needed to know where the 3rd man was. As if answering his question, a voice rose from below, coming from somewhere to the left, out of Caleb's line of sight. "She's not going to talk tonight." The voice was smooth, calm. The kind of calm that made Caleb's skin crawl because it wasn't natural. It was practiced. "We'll start again in the morning. The girl first." Clara's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "You touch her and I'll kill you. I don't care what happens after. I will kill you." A laugh, low and cold. "Mrs. Dunn, your husband said something similar before the end." It didn't help him much. Silence. Terrible, loaded silence. Caleb felt something change inside him. Something that had been quiet for a long time woke up. Not anger, something beyond anger. Something colder and more focused, like the moment before a hammer falls. These men had killed Thomas Dunn, Clara's husband. And now they had Clara and her daughter, and they wanted something, the mining claim, the location of whatever Thomas had found, and they were willing to hurt a child to get it. Caleb made his peace with what he was about to do. He waited. Patience was not a virtue in this moment, it was a weapon. He waited until full dark, until the fire burned down to embers, until the man by the fire wrapped himself in his bedroll and pulled his hat over his eyes. He waited until the big one by the horses settled back against his boulder and stopped moving. He waited until the camp grew quiet except for the hiss of dying coals and the soft sound of wind through the canyon. Then he moved. He descended from the ledge slowly, finding handholds in the rock by feel, his rifle slung across his back. Every scrape of boot on stone sounded like thunder in his ears, but the wind covered him. When he reached the ground, he was on the south side of the bowl, behind a tumble of rocks about 20 yards from where Clara and Sophie sat. He could see the third man now, the tall one. He was sitting on a flat rock near the gap in the wall, smoking a cigarette, facing outward, watching the entrance. The scar on his cheek caught the faint glow of the ember between his fingers. The sentry. Caleb unslung his rifle. He checked the chamber by touch. He steadied his breathing. 3 men. He had to take out the sentry first, quietly if possible. Then the big one. Then the one by the fire, who might or might not wake up fast enough to matter. He pulled his knife from his belt. He moved through the shadows like smoke, keeping the rocks between him and the sentry, circling wide. 10 yards. 5. The tall man shifted, flicked his cigarette away. The ember arced through the darkness like a tiny falling star. Caleb stepped out of the shadows behind him. "Don't move," he said low and hard. The man moved anyway, fast spinning, hand going for his gun. Caleb hit him with the butt of his rifle, a short, brutal strike to the temple. The man crumpled sideways, hit the ground, and didn't get up, but the sound carried. The big one by the horses jerked awake, grabbing his rifle, and the one by the fire threw off his bedroll and rolled sideways, reaching for the pistol on his hip. And the night exploded. The big man fired first. A wild shot that sparked off the rock wall 3 feet to Caleb's left, the sound shattering the silence of the canyon like a crack in the world. Caleb was already moving, dropping behind a boulder, bringing his rifle up in one smooth motion born of years he thought he'd left behind. He fired. The shot took the big man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The man cursed, a guttural animal sound, and tried to raise his rifle again with one arm. Caleb worked the lever and fired again. The second shot put him down. The third man, the one from the bedroll, was on his feet now, pistol in hand, crouched low by the dying fire. He fired twice toward Caleb's position, the bullets cracking against the boulder, sending chips of stone into the air. Caleb pressed himself flat, feeling the rock fragments sting his face. "Who are you?" the man shouted into the darkness. His voice was high, strained, scared. "Who the hell are you?" Caleb didn't answer. He shifted right, moving to a new position behind a second boulder. The man by the fire was silhouetted against the faint glow of the embers, a target if Caleb took the shot. But the man was between Caleb and Clara. A miss, a pass-through, he couldn't risk it. "Clara!" Caleb shouted. "Get down! Get Sophie down flat!" He heard movement. The sound of Clara pulling Sophie behind the rock overhang, pressing them both into the ground. The man by the fire pivoted toward the sound of Caleb's voice and fired again. The shot went wide. Caleb rose from behind the boulder, sighted, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped his pistol, staggered, sat down heavily in the dirt beside the dead fire. Then he fell sideways and was still. Silence rushed back in like a tide. Caleb waited. 10 seconds. 20. He counted his heartbeats, each one a hammer stroke in his chest. He scanned the camp through the rifle sights, checking each body for movement. The big one was down. The one by the fire was down. The tall one with the scar was still crumpled where Caleb had struck him. Moving. The tall man was moving, pushing himself up on one arm, shaking his head, reaching for the gun at his hip. "Don't," Caleb said. He stepped into the open, rifle leveled at the man's chest. The tall man looked up at him. His eyes were glassy, unfocused but clearing. The scar on his cheek was a white line in the darkness. He looked at Caleb, then at the 2 fallen men, and something shifted in his face. Not fear, but calculation. The weighing of odds. "You're making a mistake," the man said. His voice was still smooth, still controlled, even now. "You don't know what this is about. I know enough. She has something that belongs to my employer. A claim worth more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. We're just here to collect what's owed. By kidnapping a woman and a child." The man almost smiled. By recovering stolen property. Her husband's property. Her husband is dead. The claim transferred to our employer through legal purchase before Dunn died. She has the original deed. She won't produce it. She won't tell us where the mine is. The man's eyes were sharp now, fully focused. Walk away. This isn't your fight. Caleb looked at the man for a long moment. Then he looked past him, toward the overhang where Clara lay with Sophie in her arms. Get up, Caleb said. Slowly, the tall man rose to his feet, hands slightly raised. He was taller than Caleb by 3 inches, thin as a fence rail, and he moved with a calm that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd been at the wrong end of a gun. Your friends are done, Caleb said. The one by the horses is breathing, but he's not getting up soon. The other one isn't breathing at all. You want to join him, keep talking about legal purchases and stolen property. Or you can get on your horse and ride out of this canyon and never come back to Cimarron Valley. My employer. Your employer can come himself if he wants that claim, and I'll have the same conversation with him. Shorter, maybe. The tall man studied Caleb's face. Whatever he saw there, the steadiness of the hands, the flatness of the eyes, the absolute absence of bluff, seemed to decide him. He lowered his hands slowly. Can I take the wounded man? Caleb nodded. Took time. The tall man roused the big one. Shot through the shoulder, bleeding badly but conscious, and got him onto a horse. He mounted his own. He gathered the reins of the 3rd horse, the dead man's horse, and led it behind him. At the gap in the rock, he stopped and turned back. This isn't over, he said. For you it is, Caleb replied. Next time I won't talk first. The man held his gaze for a moment. Then he rode into the darkness, and the sound of hooves faded, and the canyon was quiet again. Caleb set down his rifle. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline bleeding off, leaving him hollow and unsteady. He walked to the overhang. Clara was sitting up, Sophie still pressed to her chest. The girl was crying, soft, exhausted crying. The kind that comes after terror has passed and there's nothing left but the trembling. Clara looked up at him. Her face was battered. The bruise he'd seen from above was worse up close, a dark crescent across her left cheekbone. Her lip was split. Her wrists were raw from being bound, but her eyes were clear, ferociously clear. You came, she said. I did. I told you I wouldn't need anything. I remember. She stared at him, and then something broke in her. Some wall, some barrier she'd been holding up for longer than he could imagine. Her face crumpled, and she pressed her forehead against Sophie's hair, and she wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, shuddering release, like a dam giving way in slow motion. Caleb sat down on the ground across from her. He didn't touch her, didn't speak. He just sat there, within reach, in the dark, while the stars turned overhead and the canyon held them in its ancient, indifferent hands. After a long time, Sophie's crying stopped, and the girl's breathing deepened into sleep. Clara looked up, her eyes red, her face streaked. My husband found a silver vein in Missouri, she said quietly. A big one. A man named Garrett Hollis wanted it. Thomas wouldn't sell, so Hollis had him killed and forged a bill of sale. I took the original deed and ran. I've been running for 2 years. You don't have to run anymore, Caleb said. She shook her head slowly. You don't know Hollis. No, but he doesn't know me either. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for something. He didn't know what she found there, but after a moment, she nodded. Just once. A small, exhausted nod, like a woman setting down a weight she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten what her shoulders felt like without it. We should go, she said. Before dawn. We should, he agreed. He helped her stand. He carried Sophie. The girl was feather-light in his arms, her small hand clutching his shirt even in sleep. They walked to where he'd tied his horse, and he set Sophie in the saddle and led them through the canyon by starlight, Clara walking beside him, close enough that their arms brushed with every step. Neither of them moved away. They reached Clara's cabin by mid-morning. The mule brayed when it saw them, a sound so loud and relieved it almost sounded human. Sophie woke up, blinked, saw the cabin, and said, "Home." In a voice so small and hopeful it could break a man in two. Caleb helped Clara clean up the cabin. They righted the table, fixed the chair, swept the glass. He boarded the window that had been damaged and checked the locks on both doors. He didn't ask permission. She didn't tell him to stop. That afternoon, he rode into Buckhorn and told Sheriff Hadley what had happened. Hadley listened, wrote things down, and said he'd send word to the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver. Caleb didn't put much faith in it, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, Caleb did something he hadn't done in a long time. He built. He extended his fence line east, all the way to Clara's property, closing the gap between them. He installed a gate in the middle so Sophie could run back and forth between the two homesteads. He reinforced Clara's porch. He fixed the crooked chimney that had leaned since the day she arrived. Clara let him, and slowly, carefully, like a wild animal learning to trust an open hand, she began to let him in. They were never loud about it, never dramatic. This wasn't a love story forged in passion. It was something quieter and stronger. Two broken people who'd learned that the distance they kept from the world wasn't the same as safety. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close the gap. Garrett Hollis never came to the Cimarron Valley. Whether it was the tall man's report or the marshal's inquiry, or simply the understanding that some things cost more than they're worth, whatever the reason, no strangers came asking about Clara Dunn again. And every evening, from his porch, Caleb Mercer watched the lantern in her window burn steady and bright. But now, some nights, he watched it from closer. From the chair beside hers. From the other side of the table. From the place where the half-mile between them used to be. Some distances aren't measured in land. They're measured in trust. And trust, once given in a place like that, in a canyon, in the dark, with a child in your arms and a rifle at your side, is not easily broken. What would you have done in his place? Would you have crossed that half-mile? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.